There will be a conversation that we're going to have for quite some time in relation to confronting anti Semitism, particularly after the Bondi attack, because we need to accept the notion that anti Semitism is real. It is dangerous, and it must be confronted directly and without qualification. History alone makes that non negotiable. But confronting anti Semitism does not require abandoning reason. And it does not justify panic, collective suspicion, or, and this is really important, political overreach, of which I think we're seeing a considerable amount at this particular point in time, especially after a tragedy. On December the 14th, Australia was shaken by the massacre at Bondi. The violence was horrific. The loss of life was real. And the fear that followed was entirely human. Moments like this test a country, not just in how we grieve, but in how we respond. Anti-Semitism is hatred of Jews because they are Jews. It is conspiracy thinking. It is intimidation and exclusion. And it must be confronted without hesitation, and it must be confronted at every possible moment. But confronting anti-Semitism cannot mean collapsing political dissent into racial hatred, or treating protest as presumed violence. Extremism always uses the same logic. We are under attack. Only we are innocent. Extraordinary measures are justified. We honour the victims of Bondi by being better than our worst instincts. Zero tolerance for anti-Semitism. That is where we should go. Zero tolerance for extremism is also where we should go. Justice without fear. It is important that we understand that that justice is important in our community, and that we must look at all of these issues that we're confronted around anti-Semitism and Islamophobia from a broader, more inclusive perspective. So I've been giving some thought to radical Christian extremism in particular, and how radical Christian extremism is kind of expressed both here in Australia and in the United States. And let's be clear, Christianity does not cause violence. Extremism does, and that needs to be our focus. And when Christian beliefs are radicalized, politicized, and stripped of accountability, they can and have produced violent behavior. We shouldn't forget that. Now, this is not an attack on faith. It's a defense of facts. Now, there are some cases in the United States I'm going to talk about which are important. So, in 1995, Timothy McVeigh carried out the Oklahoma City bombings. 168 people were killed, including 19 children. McVeigh was influenced by Christian identity ideology, a radical belief that the United States is a divinely ordained Christian nation under attack from a corrupt, secular government. How often do we hear that? Violence was framed as moral defense. This was Christian extremism, regardless of how it was labeled in headlines. In 2015, Robert Deere opened fire at a Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado. He killed 3 people and injured 9. Deere described himself as a Christian warrior, justifying murder as defense of God's law. This was religiously motivated violence. On January the 6th, 2021, the United States Capitol was attacked. Crosses, prayers, and banners reading, "Jesus saves," were prominent. Scholars now describe this as radicalized Christian nationalism. The belief that democracy is invalid if it conflicts with God's will. And that is an example that we see, or something we should note, right across the board, whether it be extreme in the Muslim community or extreme in the Christian community. It is still the same notion, regardless of who's saying it. It is the same. So there are a few, there is an Australian example around this too. In 2001, Peter Knight shot and killed a security guard at a Melbourne abortion clinic. Knight justified the killing using religious language about sin and divine judgment. This was ideologically motivated violence rooted in radical moral absolutism. Australia has also seen the rise of imported Christian nationalist ideas, particularly through online media and political movements. These ideas frame Australia as a Christian nation under siege. And I think we can all take some time out to acknowledge that that is the message that we're getting, particularly from overseas podcasters and commentators. Minorities, journalists, and academic institutions are portrayed as enemies. And don't you think that that sounds familiar? Intelligence agencies now monitor these movements as extremism risks. The pattern is consistent. Claim divine authority, dehumanize opponents, justify violence as necessary. This is the same structure we see in all forms of religious extremism. So the lesson is simple. Defending religious freedom requires naming religious extremism, no matter where it comes from. Silence and double standards protect radicals, not faith. Faith with humility builds communities. Faith with absolute certainty destroys them. That is the line. And I'm telling you, folks, it matters. Before you go anywhere, remember to subscribe to my channel. Ring the bell for further notifications. Remember, it doesn't cost you anything, and I appreciate it.